Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Zoom. My name is Harold Weidman, and I want to welcome you from Fort McMurray all the way down to Lethbridge and Medicine Hat and all points in between. So as we're going to make this hopefully a very beneficial afternoon and give you as much information as possible. As you may or may not know, but I'm going to introduce Cameron Carter, who is the president who has just acquired Reliance, and I'll ask Cameron just to give a couple comments before we start.
Thanks, Harold. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to this just as much as you are. I'm sure I'll learn some things as well. So you'll learn some great things, I'm sure, from this group of wonderful, knowledgeable speakers. So thank you again.
So yeah, welcome to our presentation. If anybody is having trouble or difficulties getting on, or your team members are, you can email Justine, Justine, at normacmac.ca, and she'll resend the link. So if anyone's having issues, she can give you a hand. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you, our valued clients, for attending this event. We think it will be informative, and everyone in the Zoom has been muted to ensure we remain on our timeline. But if you have any questions along the way, just feel free to type them in the message section, and we'll be compiling a summary of answers for you at the end of this presentation. And a small interjection, that is that we were pleased to announce last week that we've joined the Normac family, and we will remain committed to delivering the best service to our clients and industry at large through our reporting and our quoting. To our presenters, we thank you for joining us. Today we will be welcoming Tony Reed from BFL, Jody Scarlett from ProStar Cleaning and Restoration, Lori Kiedrowski from McLeod Law, and Dion Levesque from Scott Venturo. The SIUD process has been interesting to navigate, so we thought we would bring in some top professionals who can speak to the complexities of the SIUD. But first, before I turn it over to Tony, I want to provide a little background and definition as what the SIUD is and the purpose behind it. Here we go. Okay, so the idea is to describe the most basic standard unit that would have been built at the time of construction, with no upgrades, and to identify each component outlined by Service Alberta in its most basic form. In the event of a total loss, the point of this exercise is to ensure the condominium corporation would understand what it is responsible for replacing in each unit. It also helps in aiding the difference between a standard component and a betterment and improvement. So how do we read the bylaws in order to understand what the corporation is responsible for in terms of betterments and improvements? I'm going to turn it over to Tony Reed for him to go through that with you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for attending. It's very nice to see some familiar faces, albeit virtually in the little boxes, but thank you for having me. So to determine who's supposed to cover what, we need to look in the bylaws. The bylaws is basically the Bible, for all intents and purposes, for the insurance corporation. So how to read the bylaws to understand what the corporation is and is not responsible for in order to determine whether an SIUD is required or helpful. So there's a sample there of a bylaw there, and what it says is that fire insurance with extended coverage in C, all of the units, including all buildings, but excluding all improvements and betterments to the unit. So in this case, one of the most common questions we're asked, and we generally can do a whole hour or 2 hour topic on improvements and betterments, is if the improvements and betterments are excluded, well, how do we determine a value? And our answer used to be, well, we don't know. That's up to you to find out. And so one of the great things with the SIUD now is it does state what base spec is in the condominium. So even if you're the third owner of a condo and you buy it, and the countertops have been upgraded to granite, that doesn't mean it was as is. you buying it, that is still an improvement. So the SIUD helps determine what is base spec. So you can look at the condo and then realize, okay, I had X that needs to be insured in addition and added to my personal contents. The other item in there is the Act states that an SIUD is required if improvements and betterments are excluded. But if improvements and betterments are included in the condo, again, it doesn't say you have to have it. That being said, from an insurance standpoint, highly recommend that you do get it. Reason is that a lot of the bylaws out there that you'll see suggest that the corporation is to ensure improvements and betterments to which the board has knowledge or to which the unit owner has advised them. And again, the only way to actually know what to insure for is to have an SIUD done to know what is above base spec and to know what kind of dollar figure to put on the improvements and betterments. Another common misconception, just want to mention quickly, is that if you have a Bearland condo, again, you do need to refer to the insurance section in there if there needs to be coverage. A lot of times we'll see a Bearland condo and they'll just say, oh, it's Bearland, we don't need insurance, that's unit owner's responsibility. And that is an incorrect assumption to make. We all know what assume does mean to you. So what you need to do is actually review the insurance section to find out. If we can go to the next slide, Kim, and feel free if you have any questions to throw it in the chat, if that's okay, Kim, or are we taking questions at the end?
We're just going to compile the questions that people are going to ask, like in the message center, and then kind of compile them and then just email them a summary afterwards.
Okay, perfect. So the next slide, what is commonly included or excluded? So chattel appliances. So why is my dishwasher included and not my fridge? So again, I usually use the example, if you've heard me talk before, and it is a very quick and dirty example. But, you know, turn the condo upside down, give her a shake, and anything that falls out is generally the unit owner's responsibility. And so, you know, why would your dishwasher be included in the appraisal? Because it's generally built in. When you look at a fridge or, you know, even a microwave, if it comes with that, they would fall out. They're not built in. The oven, again, sometimes can be a built-in oven, which can be included. So you do need to go through the bylaws. And one of the things on here was exterior windows and doors. Now, I don't know about you, but generally when you buy a condo, they come with windows and doors. So that is included in the condo corporation's appraisal. But what is something to look for there is it is usually found on a Bearland condo. So, you know, like a townhome style, a duplex, the villa style, sometimes they will exclude the windows and the doors. So it is something to pay attention to. And you can find that again in the description of what the appraisal does show on that. The next slide is, you know, betterments and improvements, how the SIUD can help. So if the condo corporation is responsible for covering betterments, how do they determine them in order to make sure they are adequately covered? Super question. We get that asked a lot. Appraisals generally do not include improvements and betterments. I mean, the only way they could do that truthfully is to go into each unit and go through and then assess a dollar value. Generally, that is not realistic to do. So a lot of the bylaws we do see, you know, the corporation needs to receive something in writing from the unit owner to advise what's been done, how much the difference is, what they need to insure for. Again, I've seen in condos where like apartment style, depending on the finishings, if it's more of a luxury one, or, you know, they know a lot of people upgrade it to say granite, they'll go, you know, as easy as a $5,000 or $10,000 amount per condo or per unit. So if they have, say, a 10-unit building and they're responsible for ensuring the improvements and betterments, they might just say, okay, 10 times 10,000, you know, add an extra 100 grand in for improvements and betterments. Where this does get very complicated is on townhouse styles or villas, especially when you have an unfinished basement. As we know, some basements can be done up nicer than the rest of the house, and you could easily have a $50,000 or $100,000 improvement. Always recommend erring on the side of caution. You know, in the grand scheme of things, an extra 100,000, 200,000, you know, on your building value is not going to make a huge difference. But in the event of a claim, your boards, your unit owners will certainly be happy that you did, you know, you were a bit more conservative or a bit more lenient in the values, overestimating a bit. So again, you know, same reason, the SIUD just can tell what base spec is, so you know what to insure for more. What if the condominium corporation is underinsured for betterments and improvements because they were not declared by all owners? So again, very good question. Generally speaking, if there was a lack of money out there, you know, from being underinsured on the improvements and betterments, there would be, I think we said a special assessment or a cash call. Is that what we said, Lori, before, Dion? Yeah. And the board or the unit owners would be asked to make up the difference in that. And that's why, you know, that's why we always recommend an appraisal. The condo act says you need to be insured to full value. As much fun as you or me guessing what full value is, I would rather have, you know, the experts like Harold or Cam or Kim come in and give me that value, so we know for certain what is to be covered, the amount. Now, the next slide is the betterments and improvements. How are they distributed between unit owners should a total loss occur? Luckily in my career, I've never seen a total loss on my personal book. We have had a few. And again, we've never been underinsured on that. The rule of thumb is when there is a total loss, generally an insurance trustee or you know, a lawyer, because I've honestly never seen an insurance trustee, will be appointed. The insurance company would cut a check to them for the money of the total loss, and then it would be distributed to the unit owners. Again, it is up to the insured or the unit owners in this case to prove your loss. So when, you know, again, you'll see some on personal lines policies where they'll have a list. You could take a list of items. I remember back in the day when I did do personal insurance, we'd recommend, you know, take a video camera, show what you have in the event of a loss so that you can prove it. But I mean, it would come down to it being distributed. And then if there was a lack of insurance, and again, just before the presentation, we were talking about this one, it would probably end up in court. In a court dispute to figure out the allocations of the money there. So that is, the SIUD has been extremely helpful in just determining, you know, to sum up the insurance part, what the unit owner is responsible to insure for, and it takes out a lot of the guessing work, but please refer to your bylaws.
Now, one question before we move on to Jody is that one of the questions that I'll just put out there, Tony, is that a lot of board members and unit owners have asked for the SIUD, and they're saying that they can't get insurance without the SIUD. Is that something that you're familiar with or that you've seen happen?
Long answer or short answer, no, I have not seen that happen. I mean, yeah, no, the insurance companies, if I'm being honest, don't look at the act. until there is a claim. At which point, you know, and I don't mean to be pessimistic about our industry sometimes, but then they start to thoroughly review it and go through to make sure they've met everything. I would just recommend that you do get an SIUD, you know, just to make sure you're fully protected.
Okay, thank you so much. And now we are going to put the presentation over to Jody Scarlett with ProStar Cleaning and Restoration. Let me just, okay, take it from the top, Jody.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you all. And thanks, Kim. So one of the big questions that people always ask, you know, in my experience as a restoration professional is, you know, what if these things are obsolete at the time of the loss? And what I really would like boards to think about is that assume they will be. Most things will become obsolete over time, and it's best to just assume that things will be obsolete at the time of the loss. So if we work from that assumption or that lens, how can we produce an SIUD? And the answer I find best is just to think in terms of the way that insurance thinks. And insurance adjusters look at something called like, kind, and quality. The LKQ is a very common acronym when dealing with an insurance claim and replacement for any item inside a property. So they always look at the LKQ, and when we have things that have become obsolete, we're looking for the modern day equivalent substitutions, which can lead to the idea of an upgrade or a downgrade. So this slide, there's a couple of pictures here for you to look at, and you see the fireplace on the left. This is an example of what I would consider to be a perceived upgrade. In an SIUD, this fireplace might have been described properly by its attributes as how many BTU it had and its features, like did it have, you know, gas, did it have a fan, those kinds of things. Now, this fireplace you're looking at has a much larger viewing area than the ones that you might have seen installed in 1980. And most homeowners would be very pleased to have this fireplace installed in their home on a repair after a loss. And then the contrasting picture you see is this Delta faucet. And this Delta faucet was this is a real life photo of a very sort of acrobatic situation we had with the SIUD on a recent large claim. So the faucet you're looking at, you can imagine that this is not a faucet that might be put back in 2021 on reinstallation. However, it isn't a builder's grade or basic faucet. So the trick with the SIUD was really to capture the description of this faucet to ensure that regardless of whether the item was actually available to repurchase, that the qualities and attributes of the item were reflected so that the returned item wasn't a base builder's model. This faucet has a porcelain finish, it has mixed metals, and it's more of a mid-grade faucet. The most interesting part about this faucet is that actually you can get it. And if you went to go get it today, it would actually cost $638. So the question that comes up is $638 the entitled value for like, kind, and quality of replacement? And this is a lens that can be very challenging for board members. And I would just suggest that property managers think probably not. It's a mid-grade faucet, and the like, kind, and quality lens that insurance will always look through will be to return you to something like, kind, and quality. They don't generally look at like, kind, and quality through a dollar value, but rather an attribute description. And I'll take the next slide now, which brings us to the question of, you know, what is the actual basic standard from an adjuster's perspective? And adjusters always think in terms of the base grade, which is you know, you can really think of as the lowest common denominator as supported by the facts. Let's just think for a moment about what are the facts. When you think about a large loss, you know, a loss of great magnitude, a lot of times in these situations, you know, the building is still there for observation. You know, as much as maybe some units or a portion of the building may not be recognizable, much of the building, it can be evaluated and examined. And what in practical experience we find is that the facts actually speak for themselves, because in one of these large loss situations, if we were looking at what is the base building, we can go through 40 or 50 units, and if we find 17 things that are the same in 40 or 50 units, that tells us that that was the base, because there's no way that 17 people upgraded or downgraded to the exact same item. Conversely, the other issue that we have is silence in the SIUD. So not just people overstating the SIUD, but silence in the SIUD. And we saw this, one of the things I wanted to mention was we saw this in Ontario, where they've had SIUDs registered for some time. And the SIUD did not state that the townhomes on the project had porcelain tile. It was silent. The apartment complex that was registered had Berber carpet throughout, and that was what was registered on the entire SIUD. But the porcelain tile in the entryways of the townhomes were missing. And this gap, it's not the same to be vague as it is to be inaccurate, but this gap, which was inaccurate and did not state for the porcelain tile, did cause a coverage gap in my experience. Now, not every claim is adjudicated and adjusted the same way, but in this case, the unit owners, the insurer said that they didn't have an opportunity to charge premium because they didn't know about that value of the porcelain tile, and therefore the unit owners, it was deemed as a betterment, even though it was in all the units throughout the building. So with that, that did cause the gap. Now, a tale of two descriptions. So this is how SIUDs have changed. And if you could go to the next slide, Kim. This is a real SIUD, one back. Thanks. This is a real SIUD. So in 2019, before the legislation, here's how it read. It said melamine cabinet or equivalent. Quite succinct, seems normal. If you walked in to the condo, it was a melamine cabinet or equivalent. That was not incorrect. It was just not a fulsome description. So the claim had happened in just before the SIUD had to be registered. So we needed to kind of take care of this. So the board wrote up the SIUD and we helped them with it, because the cabinets were not what they seemed. They were not just melamine cabinet or equivalent. It turned out they were a frameless, full overlay European style cabinet with melamine cabinet boxes. Cabinet fronts were MDF and high gloss lacquer. The lacquer was a 2-component post-catalyzed white primer and high performance 2-component white gloss varnish pigmented enamel. You get the idea that these weren't actually cabinets that you're going to buy at a builder, builder grade cabinet. These cabinets were produced by a furniture maker, and they were actually custom cabinets at the time of build. So the board was very concerned about making sure that the quality of the product that they had was replaced. Now, a builder-based cabinet for 40-unit condo cabinet replacement for full kitchens might cost about $400,000. These kitchens, as described, produced by the original producer, would cost about $1.2 million. Just to give you an idea of the spread we're talking about a material change in insurance. So how this was practically adjudicated by the claims team is they looked at modern day equivalent manufacturing methods to create a like, kind, and quality condition. So although they didn't get back the $400,000 builder basic kitchen, and they did get back something much greater, which was a shank product with a laser edge banded technology, et cetera, it cost about $700,000. So this is how SIUDs are changing. I see that going forward, if it just said melamine cabinet or equivalent, that would certainly be interpreted as builder basic and not necessarily what they had. And this is how it pans out, because people don't get back exactly what they had, but they get back a like, kind, and quality equivalent. It always gets interpreted through the lens of today's design, with an opportunity for the, you know, the changes that the unit owner might wish to make, like putting the cabinets up to the ceiling, or, you know, having a raised eating bar. Next slide. So, you know, can the SIUD have an all or nothing approach? Essentially, you know, what happens, you know, we saw an example of a 1980 built condo, which was, you know, renovated building at that time, renovated from a nursing residence. In 2013, it suffered a flood. And in 2015, it suffered a fire. And that affected, you know, a large percentage of the building in both of those events. So when it comes time to write the SIUD, and we look for common finishings throughout the building, what becomes base in this situation? Is it the Berber carpet that was installed in 1980 and ceramic tile, or is it the laminate that got installed, you know, what was more on trend in 2013 and 2015? So my thoughts are that it's okay in an SIUD situation to be as explanatory as possible. We can say Berber and porcelain or laminate. You know, using good wordings like that can be helpful. And remember that the facts will speak for themselves on analysis of the building. We can also use some categories. So it's very helpful to describe units in categories. So the lofted units have ceiling fans, or the 3-bedroom units have fireplaces, because sometimes there's a few units on build out that are quite upgraded, and it does come up that, you know, the 2 show suites, is that base or is that now a betterment and upgraded? And how I've seen it play out in my experience is that it would go to betterments if it's not, even if it was built by the builder, if it's different than the normal specification in the building, although different adjusters may interpret that differently, but it would be best if the SIUDs certainly stated categories. So the show suites included X would be wording that we could include in an SIUD. Next slide. And then the last big question is, what if there's conflicts in terms of the SIUD? And the answer really is that in the actual, you know, the end of the day, if there's a claim, the adjuster always adjudicates the claims, and the board is not powerless. They certainly can speak to their broker, who are excellent advocates, and the adjuster is going to talk to the market. But at the end of the day, it does go to the adjuster. And that's the end of my section, and I hope that was helpful for everybody.
We appreciate your input. That was really informative. Now we're going to put it over to Lori and Dion. I'm not sure which slides you guys want to fight over, but it's all yours.
I can start with the legislation piece because Dion's got the first question on the next slide, so that divvies us up. I guess the first thing I wanted to remind everybody is that whenever we're looking at how we're handling our losses or handling anything in our condominium corporations, we need to remember that we're governed by our bylaws and by our legislation. And this section of the legislation here is what we refer to when we look at how we're adopting or amending our standard insurable unit description. So it's section 61.2 of the regulations, which are the regulations to the Act. I recently had somebody express some surprise that there is actually an Act and regulations. It was a manager who didn't know that. So if there's one of you out there who doesn't know that, then I'm guessing there's more than just one of you out there who doesn't know that. So we do have an Act and we do have regulations to the Act. So where you find a lot of the most of the insurance pieces now are in the regulations to the Act. And this is the section of the Act that you look to, and it's section 61.2. And I'm not going to read it to you because I'm sure you can all read it yourselves and we only have so much time, but this is where you would look, and I'm sure you're going to keep these slideshows afterwards. So it's a place for you to refer back to when you're having some questions about this, if you are. I'm moving over to John now, I guess.
Sure, that works. So the first question I had, and we can probably flip back and forth, is can the board sign off on the SIUD without a meeting? So meaning without an owner's meeting, just via email or by board resolution and bypass the AGM? Or does the board have to take the SIUD to the AGM? And if you go back to that slide that Lori was just on there, it was 2 slides ago, you can see in subsection 3 there, if a corporation adopts an SIUD by board resolution, 2C refers to board resolution, then it has to be taken to the owners at the next AGM for ratification. So the board can't just adopt it by themselves. They have to take it to the owners to review and revise as the owners see fit. The board could, as an alternative, I guess, hold a special meeting to approve the SIUD, because that would fall under 2B there. That would be an ordinary resolution. And so if 50% of your owners at a special meeting approve the SIUD, then you don't have to retake that to the AGM. Nice, easy question for me.
And just how you do that at the meeting is that you're going to want to have pre-prepared in advance a motion to that effect. It is hereby moved that the SIUD as presented with the annual general meeting mail out is ratified by the owners, something along those lines. Just have it prepared in advance so that your minutes will reflect it appropriately. Would be another little piece to add on to that. I've done a few of them so far, and I guess we'll get to that later. So far, so good. The next question we had is if the SIUD is passed as a board resolution and nothing changes to it as a result of the AGM, does it need to be re-registered at land titles? We're not 100% clear on this, but we think that it does. And the reason that we think that it does is because the section of the Act speaks to, or the regulations, registering with a clear indication of how the SIUD was passed. So if we've passed it by board resolution and then subsequently it's affirmed or ratified by owner resolution, our registered SIUD at the land titles office is no longer accurate and it no longer reflects the business of the corporation as it was conducted. So we're thinking that, yeah, you probably should re-register it, which brought us in our discussions the other day to the question of, so do we discharge the last one? The answer would be yes, I would think. I haven't discharged one yet because we don't want to have a whole bunch of SIUDs stacked on top of each other. It's like corporations that register 6 sets of bylaws from 1979 all the way to 2008, and now there's all these bylaws. We're going to want to discharge the previously passed SIUD, and we're going to have to figure out how to do that. And I'm sure land titles will help us when we get there, when the time comes.
Yeah, there's no form to discharge it that I'm aware of. I don't know if you are, Lori, yet, so we haven't run into that one. So we'll be knocking on land titles door, asking them how to do that when we have to do that. The next question I have is what happens if the owners can't come to a consensus on the SIUD at an AGM? This is a really good question. I don't have an answer for it because there's nothing in the legislation that actually has an answer for this. I would say you really have to encourage your owners to come to some sort of agreement. And just if there are concerns, the board should be open to amendment rather than sticking with their first stance, because the board at the end of the day is obligated, the corporation is obligated to put this in place. So it's mandatory, it's not permissive for some condominiums. So again, I think people really need to work together, and I suppose we'll have to cross that hill when we get to it. Lori, have you seen the disagreement amongst the owners yet?
Not yet, I haven't. And I guess, so I've actually not had anybody, and I don't even want to say it out loud because I've got an AGM tomorrow night and dollars to donuts. Because if I say it's never happened, that's what will happen tomorrow night at the AGM. I haven't, but I guess this actually goes to the next question, is what unit owner quorum count is required for approval? Is it 50 or 75 of the attendees at the AGM, or 50 or 75% of total owners of the units. I agree with Dion. I think it's probably best that we work with the owners to understand if they're in disagreement, why they're in disagreement. But generally speaking, you're going to have a vote on it, and you're almost always going to end up having a win on it or a loss, right? You're going to get your ordinary resolution, or you're not going to get your ordinary resolution. If it's not passed, then you have to work with your owners, but I digress. Back to the question. So what unit owner quorum count is required? So if we're doing this by way of an ordinary resolution, we can do it one of two ways. We can do it by way of a mailer to the owners and have it approved by 50% of the unit owners, representing 5,000, just over 5,000 unit factors, which is painful. We all know how painful that is, and it's difficult. Or you do an ordinary resolution at a meeting that has been convened for either this purpose or just a regular annual general meeting with this as an agenda item. It's easier to just do this as at an ordinary resolution at a meeting because you only need 50% of the people who are in attendance. So it's a huge difference on what the test is. If I have a 100 unit project and quorum for my project is 25%, and we get quorum with 26%, we can have the SIUD approved by really 13% or 14% of the owners who are in attendance who approve of it. Versus going out with a mailer, you're going to need your 50%. And again, I always look to the act. So you look at the definitions of what an ordinary resolution is, and it tells you, and I'm not going to read it to you, but it's, well, I'm not going to read it to you, but it says exactly what the ordinary resolution is there. Now, the next one is if we're going to do this by way of, so generally speaking, it's our preference to do it by board resolution and then ordinary resolution. If we're not doing it that way, then we're doing it by special resolution. We prefer to do it by way of ordinary resolution because the legislation says that in order to change it, if it's approved by special resolution, is that you need to have another special resolution to change it. And as we know, special resolutions are almost impossible. They're very, very difficult to get because that's a two-tiered test, whether you're at a live meeting or by mailer. And it's 75% of the unit owners representing not less than 7,500 unit factors. So it's a lot of adding and a lot of calculating and a lot of signatures to get. Going forward, I highly doubt that we're going to be getting a lot of these approved by way of special resolution just because it's so cumbersome. What I think we're going to be dealing with is in the olden days, before we had this legislation, a lot of us were drafting bylaws to, as an appendix, include basically a description of what a base standard unit would be. And it was very, very different than what the professionals are doing now. We were just kind of throwing them out there and saying, here's a list of the items, let's see what they are. So that brings on the question of what do we do with those sets of bylaws that have these appendixes that have attached these improvements and betterments or lists of them? They're different than the SIUD. And I think what I'm going to suggest going forward with those sets of bylaws is that when we amend the bylaws on the whole, we just change our appendix to say in accordance with the most recently registered SIUD. I think that'll be the simplest way of doing it. And that way, we're making reference to a separately registered document rather than, again, attaching it to our bylaws. I don't know. And that's just what I thought of today when I was writing my notes at about 10 to 2. So I can see Dion's kind of, querying it. And it just struck me that that might be the best way to deal. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dion?
No, I kind of forgot about those bylaws are floating around out there.
Yeah.
But I think that would almost be your default SIUD, right? Because if it's got descriptions in there, I think temporary purposes, you'd probably want to match your SIUD that's passed at a board level with whatever you have in your bylaws. So everything is congruous and then harmonious. And then if you are able to then amend your bylaws at a later date, right, get rid of the appendix in the bylaws. My personal preference is definitely to not pass it by special resolution because of the flexibility, right? We don't know how this is a new section of the act. We don't really know how it's going to play out long term. So certainly if you can pass it by ordinary resolution so you have the ability to change it in the future, I think that's a lot more.
And it's a whole lot of work when we don't need to do all that work. Like we have enough work on our hands with our developments that we don't need to make work projects. I don't think. I'm guessing that about 98.5% of the audience would agree with that assessment too. So, yeah.
Just as a quick another point for, and I think Tony brought this up earlier, but I just really want to hammer this home. The SIUD is not required for every condo. Doesn't mean it's not necessarily a good idea, but it's not required for every single condominium out there. All the SIUD is doing is drawing a line in the sand between what the condominium corporation insures in terms of upgrades and what the owner insures in terms of upgrades and renovations. So the boards, again, really have to go right to the bylaw section, the insurance section of the bylaws first, before they're looking at their SIUDs, and say, okay, what do we have to insure? If the board has to insure improvements and betterments, technically you don't need an SIUD. Again, there's other reasons why you might want one. The insurers can speak to that. Technically, you don't need it. However, if the bylaws say the corporation does not insure improvements and betterments, then you have to put in place a SIUD. I saw a note just at the bottom there, commercial condos do not require an SIUD. That's correct.
Yeah, that's definitely right. Yeah, and I think we were talking this through the other day as well, to continue on with what Dion was indicating. And what happens if we don't have an SIUD and we don't insure the improvements and betterments? Then what do we do? And we don't really know what will happen. We think that one of the risks by not enacting an SIUD is that the board will inadvertently make itself responsible for the improvements, or the corporation, not the board, the corporation would make itself responsible for the improvements and betterments, as there's no line in the sand drawn between what the corporation covers versus what the owners cover in their insurance. And just generally speaking, courts and interpretation of all these things will lean in favor of the bigger, I guess, more sophisticated party, which would be the corporation's insurer, as opposed to the individual unit owner's insurer or their pocketbooks. I would say that's sort of how things tend to be interpreted by the courts. But again, we don't know, because it hasn't been adjudicated yet. Fair lands. Oh man.
Yeah, that's a big question. We don't know yet. Nobody wants to spend the money to go to court. The insurers will eventually, but not right now. And just as a last point, bare land condos specifically, this affects bare land condos in a little bit of a different way, because bare land condos have the added layer of managed property. And some bare land condos have been asking for an SIUD to essentially be like a bare shell. So the only thing that the corporation would insure would be the exterior of the unit, and then everything inside, which I think would mean drywall, flooring, the whole 9 yards, depending on to what extent you want to define that bare shell, would be entirely on the bare land unit owner. And, you know, I've had some discussions with various insurance providers and other people in the industry, and with Lori and McLeod and Heather Bonnycastle, and we've all kind of sat down and like, what are the pros and cons of this? And I think the general sense is it's a bit risky to do that right now, because personal lines insurers just look at a townhouse as a townhouse as a townhouse condo. They don't necessarily delve into the details of whether or not you're a bare land condominium or you're a conventional condominium, and then who insures what. So there is the potential for, I guess, individual homeowners to have a gap in insurance. I guess in a situation where you have a personal line insurer, not to pick on the personal line insurers, who look at a condo and say, oh, okay, this is just a standard townhome condo. My owner just needs insurance for their upgraded flooring, and that's about it. And no other insurance, not realizing that in a bare shell situation, the owner actually needs insurance for the entire interior of the unit. Any other comment on that one, Lori? We've gone back.
You know, we only talked about this ourselves. I think it was on Thursday or Friday. And since then, yesterday, I had a call from Sherry with BFL, and they've got a project that's it's exactly what you're talking about, Dion. And the board of directors and they were insistent that when they did the bylaws and that when they got insurance, they were just insuring the shell. And it's one of these catastrophic losses up in the Northeast from hail, and that some of the loss has actually gone inside some of the units. It was so damaging, and the water and whatnot. And they held town halls to let the owners know what they were doing and trying to reiterate, you must get your own insurance for inside of your unit, because we're not insuring it anymore. And guess what's going on up there? I don't need to say, right? There's people who don't have insurance, and now they're up there without, I mean, how do they fix these things? They don't have insurance as owners, so now they're digging into their own pockets, and it's quite the mess.
If I could just quickly add, like Bearlands, it's very, very few and far between that actually have to insure themselves. Most Bearlands are still insured conventionally, as you know, like an apartment building would be, or townhouse style. So please, if you see Bearlands, just do not assume that they're to cover themselves. It's very rare to see what Lori and Dion are talking about.
And I think it's important to explain to your boards that it's not a big advantage to insure the absolute basic minimum, because the owner is still going to have to go out and buy insurance. And if they're buying insurance for all that interior, it's out of the left pocket or the right pocket. It's coming from somewhere, and it's probably going to be more cost efficient, even though it doesn't feel like it right now, to be doing this by way of the corporation, is my best guess.
And there's a lot more personal insurers out there, and there's a lot more different types of coverages, or as Jody mentioned earlier, the way they would resolve a claim. And I'll give you the example of High River. When there was the flooding, you could knock on 20 different doors along the same road with the same damage, and there were 20 different answers from their insurance companies. Some were covered, some weren't. So again, if you insure the whole building, you're going to get more of that consistency, and you don't have to worry about a resale value if, say your unit's completed, but the other two aren't, because one, didn't have insurance, or two, their insurance company didn't cover them properly. And I personally look at it more from a resale value. Generally, a home is one of your biggest assets. And so you want to make sure that is protected properly.
Well, and just functionality too. I mean, what happens when your insurer responds in 2 weeks, and then your neighbor's insurer doesn't respond for 3 months? What do you do about that? And what do you do when you don't have your property being remediated? I really, when I get instructions to try to pull everything out, I don't like it. And it's because it just, no good comes of it, I don't think, in the long run. It's difficult, it's awkward, it's bad results.
Here's a funny example. Here's a funny example. It was a high-end area, and there was roof damage from hail. And so it was duplexes, and there were a bunch of duplexes, say 13 duplexes or 26 units on the street. They had a town hall meeting about what they wanted to replace the roof with, and they were going to be each given different options that they could select. So you're talking about like a cul-de-sac area with 13 very similar looking places, and you could have a red roof, a green roof. Like, it was, some could be wood shake, some could be Euroshare, the rubber roof or whatever. I mean, I would think that's going to cost you in value personally.
Yeah. Or if your neighbor, we're talking about the interior, if your neighbor decides not to put up their drywall or doesn't have the money to and doesn't put up their floor, we've got sound issues, right? And how do you resolve those? And then just there's a sheer coordination of trades, corporations doing one thing, owners, contractors doing another thing. That can obviously contribute to delay.
Takes the actual cash value and goes and buys a trailer and decides he can do the drywall later when it gets colder, which we have seen. So
Yeah.
There's a great picture of a guy who bought half a house in Australia, and the builder just didn't decide to build the other piece of the lot. And there's just a sheer wall between his house and the neighboring unit. I got to take a picture of that and put it on one of these presentations to say, this is what can happen in some circumstances.
Yeah, the options are limitless. Do you want to go through just the form quickly, or should we just kind of skip over that? Like, do you guys want to just kind of discuss kind of what these forms are and just kind of how they are sent in or registered. I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. I think you can Google this. It's available on land titles. I mean, if you can't get it, it's easy to find the link. I'm sure you
Yeah,
can
and
contact Rory or I.
Yeah. Great, awesome. Do you guys have anything else to add?
I don't.
Well, we're going till 5 o'clock, right?
Yeah, that's right, Tony. Yeah.
Okay.
So kind of getting, like we've talked a lot about just sort of differentiating between betterments and improvements and standard components. There's a couple of forms that we would suggest regardless of whether your betterments are in your bylaws or not. And we can supply what's called a betterment form. And so it's free of charge. And basically once your standard insurable unit description is completed, what we do is we fill it out with all the standard components in one column. And then you as a unit owner has the opportunity to just kind of go through your unit and fill out what, based on what the standard component is, what you would be deeming the upgrade as. And then there is a column that, you can fill in sort of a dollar value if you kind of have that at the ready. And then these forms can be submitted to your condo corporation if they are insuring your betterments and improvements, and at least kind of that starts to at least document some of your improvements and maybe help the insurer and come to arrive at a rider that would be appropriate for the condo corporation. But if your betterments and improvements are not in your bylaws, then you can submit it to your own personal insurance, given that they all understand what they're insuring. So that they know how much to put in for your betterments and improvements as an individual unit owner. And that's just something that we kind of feel through this whole SIUD process is just kind of giving everybody a little bit of relief in knowing that their standard components will be covered, but their betterments will be too. So that's just sort of peace of mind that we like to kind of give to our clients as well. Jody has also supplied a profile template to Normac Reliance, and essentially what it is what an adjuster would go through a unit with upon just determining what all the components are for each unit. This is a pretty involved document, but it is pretty detailed. So she has also supplied that to us and has suggested that we can pass it on to our clients upon their request. So if that's something that you're interested in, please just email me and I can kind of point you in the right direction for the suggested forms. And then Harold.
The draft template, just talking about going from the draft to the final.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Watermarks on.
Yeah, that's right. So also just upon your final, like usually when we send out the SIUD, it's in the form of a draft. And so we encourage board members to review it and based on this whole presentation and all the information that was provided, scrutinize it, and then, come back with revisions so that we can revise it so that you would have like a final copy to register at land titles. So that's just another sort of service that we provide.
Okay, I just want to, first of all, we went through COVID, which of course was the perfect storm because of course that restricted us from being able to do inspections on the units. I can tell you assuredly that even we call those one-hit wonders, because what we were doing in our appraisals many years ago, and what we were coming up with the SIUDs, we would be permitted to go into a unit, we would look at it. There wasn't really as much knowledge about what we were really trying to accomplish, and as a result, what we normally found was that a lot of the components just weren't in fact even the flooring particularly might be very different than what it was. Now we've been able to get a lot of that information corralled by virtue of what we're doing, but again, we haven't been in the units. So we do have a very good idea. I understand what the units looked like when I was appraising them in the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000, 2010. So I understand what was really basic, a lot of the basis for those units. So the thing is, yes, there are some things there because of course, we set the draft out when we were doing that. The other thing that I noticed also was that a lot of cases, even with the inspections, there was things that were being missed, like for instance, plumbing fixture shutoffs. Those things should have been included in there. There might have been hardwood floors, so you should be looking for heat recovery units. So there's a lot of things that still need to be done. And that kind of leads me to the point where two things. One, the thing is, we still have to reconcile the SIUD to the insurance appraisal. So that's our job. And we certainly want to make sure that we're very, very close to what we're doing. And speaking of that, the thing is, I sent, not that you want to hear this, but I spent about 6 months just developing the description for the shell. The very thing that we don't want them to do, but it's very, very deep. It's about 6 pages long. And we can do that as for our appraisals, but I really don't recommend it, but it is there. And then what you do is you take that description of the shell and you send it off to the unit owners, and then they see all the homework they're going to have to do. So it's not great. I agree with all of the presenters. Stay away from it if you can, but we do, as a company, we do have that definitive description. So I finally got that one finished, and I'm working on the commercial and the industrial right now as we speak. The other thing I think you're going to start to see is I think there's going to be evolving descriptions. We've had SIUDs from 4 pages to 254 pages. Well, the thing is, there's some things you can do and there's things you don't want to do. In some instances, we've actually seen a lot of pictures that are being incorporated into the SIUD. We've seen layouts that are being incorporated in the SIUD, as well as architectural plans. So we're really, I hate to say it, but we're in the infant stages of what might occur. I've already reviewed all of the SIUDs that came out of Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. So there are things that we can still do. And I think that what Jody was showing us was there still is possibly room for detail. So I don't, as much as it sounds like this is a make work project, I think there may still be some things that the boards can look at, and hopefully as we go along this path, we can possibly give more information to the boards, as much as the fact that it's registered and they think that it's maybe that's the end of it. We just don't know, because there is a lot of things that are going on. So those are the kind of things that I wanted to just point out based on what we've been doing for the last 1.5 years of getting those SIUDs out to you. And the other thing I want you to know is this, please, the very fact that if there are any questions with SIUDs, with insurance appraisals, or with reserve fund studies, feel free to come back and email me, Harold at Normac, or Harold at Reliance Consulting, whichever one you want to use. But the point is, I'm still going to be around to answer all those questions so you can take them back to your boards. So these are the things that if I can help you out, I'm certainly going to do that going forward. But again, it's as far as the SIUD is concerned, yes, it certainly has been an interesting journey thus far.
Yeah, and I mean, and I guess the main point takeaway from this is that the importance of having everything sort of aligned and speaking to each other, from the insurance appraisal, the SIUD, the bylaws, the insurance policies, like the regulation, everything. We just really want everything to be aligned. So, I mean, accuracy is kind of the goal. And so basically, if we can ascertain an accurate SIUD, then our reporting only gets better. And so we just want to thank all of our presenters and thank you for all attending. We will be compiling your questions, and we will be getting back to you with answers. We might be directing them to the appropriate presenter for some input. But we really do appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to just come and listen to us about SIUDs.